They seemed like a regular family, at first glance at least. We lived in a neighborhood that was like any other modern suburbia. It was a nice area, the kind where you'd feel comfortable leaving your door unlocked at night. I did grow up quite comfortably, not to brag, but that's not to say things were perfect. It especially took a turn when they moved in. I was 12 years old and excited when I found out that the new neighbors had a kid my age, a girl. I had been homeschooled for a few years because my school life in our old neighborhood was absolute hell. I was a bit of an oddball. I didn't have many things in common with the students there. Not to mention I was going through an alt phase and, well, you know how it goes. When they realize you're different from them, you may as well throw in the towel and start over again. I was bullied harder than you can imagine, and no matter how many times my parents pressured the school to do something, the most they could offer was mandatory anti-bullying seminars. Someone would come into each classroom in intervals and lecture us saying, "Treat others how you want to be treated," and if you see someone sitting alone, offer them to sit with you. Yeah, a whole lot of good that did. But instead of transferring me to another school, they decided to have me homeschooled through a tutor that would visit me in person or help me over a computer video call if she or I happened to be sick that week. Mom and Dad just didn't trust the school system anymore, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. While I was relieved to not have to endure the torment of my peers daily, I soon started to realize how isolating this new arrangement was. There weren't a lot of kids my age around there, you know. They were either too young, like kindergartners, or too old, like snobby teens about to leave for college. All I wanted was to have friends, or a friend. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. I remember the day their van pulled into their driveway. I was sitting on the porch swing enjoying a bomb pop, and I immediately took interest as they all got out of the car in unison and walked into the house that had been vacant since we moved there. They strode in single file, first the dad, who quite literally was a blue-collar worker it seemed, as he had a bright blue button-up shirt. Then the mom, who seemed pretty but dressed sort of old-fashioned, and lastly their daughter, who skipped along after them like a kid from some corny cartoon. Her blonde hair swished around and I saw her blue eyes twinkle as we briefly made eye contact before she disappeared into their new home. It was weird, but I liked weird. I didn't even think about the fact they didn't show up with a moving truck, or didn't seem to move any items or belongings into the house before they just came out of nowhere. I mean, I was certain they'd only just moved in, because I noticed the for sale sign was gone that very morning, and when I asked my parents, they said no one had come by the previous days. After I brought it up to them, my very nosy mother even called the other neighbors about it to be absolutely sure. This was definitely the first day they'd been there. It might sound like I'm making a big deal out of it, but we never actually saw a moving truck in the following days either. We never even saw them unloading boxes from their van. They simply showed up, got out, and went right inside. Maybe the home was already furnished. I remember Dad saying at the dinner table one night that week, not finding this as odd or interesting as Mom and I did. "These homes don't come already furnished, Todd." My mom rolled her eyes. "And even then, you don't just bring furniture when you move. What about your luggage, clothes, that sort of thing?" "They could have done it late at night when everyone was asleep," Dad shrugged, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "Who knows?" "They have a girl my age," I'd said with excitement. "Do you think she might like some things I like?" "Like comic books and bugs?" My mom scoffed. "It's more likely she's into Barbie dolls or fashion mags, babes. But we'll see soon, I suppose. I plan on taking them a gift basket this weekend and inviting them to dinner." I was so eager to meet their daughter that I accompanied Mom the afternoon she brought the basket over. It contained fragrant flowers, exquisite chocolates, and colorful fruit kebabs, the best of the best. I tried to hide my big grin as she rang the doorbell and we waited on the doorstep. I needed to act cool, or I might scare her away. The door opened so fast it actually startled both me and Mom. Mom's finger had barely left the button, and the bell didn't have time to complete its little chime. We were met with the face of who I would come to know as Mrs. Smith, her eyes big and cheery, and her curved lips smeared with bright red lipstick. The way she applied lipstick was like a 7-year-old coloring, just a bit over the lines in their coloring book. You could tell she had no idea what she was doing with her makeup in general. She wore her blonde hair in a bob and was dressed in some sleeveless, collared, floral-printed pink dress, as if she'd stepped out of a time machine from the 60s or something. "Hi, I'm Renee, and this is my daughter, Ellen. We brought this for you to welcome you into the neighborhood." Mom handed her the basket. "Oh, this smells wonderful. I think I'll use it as a centerpiece for my table." Something about the way Mrs. Smith talked was off. It sounded so stilted, like she had memorized a script. "We wanted to invite you and your family over for dinner tonight. It's a bit short notice, but do you think you could make it?" Mom asked. "Oh, that would be wonderful," Mrs. Smith replied in an attempt at an overjoyed tone of voice. "I'm going to tell my husband, Charles Smith, and my daughter, Sally Smith. My name is Sarah Smith, by the way. We are the Smiths." Take a shot every time she says Smith, I wanted to mutter to my mom, but I didn't get the chance before she answered. She smiled and offered her hand to Mrs. Smith without a beat. "So you are. Nice to meet you all." Mrs. Smith shook her hand and stepped to the side. "Would you both like to come in for some ice-cold lemonade?" "No, thank you, but please come over to our place next door at about 6 p.m. sharp. Dinner will be done just in time. You may dress casually if you'd like. That dress looks stunning, by the way." "Oh, this old thing, I just threw this on." Mrs. Smith's smile barely faltered this entire time. It stayed just as big without waning or changing shape in any way. It started to weird me out. Who could keep such a big smile on for that long? "We will be at your house at 6, Renee Forrester." We said our goodbyes, and the shit-talking began immediately as we walked back over to our house. "It certainly looks like she just threw it on," my mom said, eliciting a snicker out of me. "What a creepy smile," I said, hoping she would agree. "Don't be ridiculous, it wasn't creepy, it was just silly looking. There's a difference, it was fake. She's trying to seem nice, but she probably isn't," Mom said as we stepped back into the house. "Hopefully she doesn't wear that old thing tonight." I realized something and blinked. "Hey Mom, when did you tell her our last name?" Mom looked at me curiously. "She said be at your house at 6, Renee Forrester, remember?" "Oh, did she?" Mom frowned. "Must have said our last names when I introduced us then." No, you didn't." I crossed my arms, growing irritated. "You just said our first names. Isn't this the first time they've met us?" "A neighbor probably told her." Mom shrugged and headed into the kitchen to meal prep. "Go lay out something cute for tonight." I did as I was told. I didn't think too much about that, focusing more on what Sally would be like. Dinner time came along and both our families found ourselves sitting at the long dining table with plates of garlic butter shrimp linguine in front of us. Dad tucked a handkerchief into his shirt as Mom went around pouring the adults white wine. Sally sat right across from me. She looked like a younger version of her mom, basically, very blonde and with that same cheesy smile. Even her dad had it. He was blonde too, with a gelled back hairstyle and a cleft chin. I wondered if their facial muscles hurt often. "So, Charles, what do you do for work?" Dad asked Mr. Smith. "What do you do for work?" Mr. Smith continued to smile, his blue eyes piercing my dad's. He didn't say it with attitude either. His voice sounded sickeningly joyful. "Oh, I'm a supervisor in insurance sales, pretty basic stuff," Dad replied, not giving too much information as he was very humble, unlike my mom. "And you?" "What a coincidence! I love sales myself," said Mr. Smith. Mom, Dad, and I awkwardly chuckled at this interaction. In response to our reaction, all three of the Smiths laughed boisterously, reminding me of an obnoxious laugh track in an old sitcom. It was the kind of laughter you'd expect after a joke or some punchline. It was very weird, but we ignored it. "I'm a real estate agent," Mom piped up. "One of the best around. I just closed a house today, in fact. Do you have any trades, Sarah, or do you have your hands full with yours?" She nodded towards Sally. "Wow, what are the odds?" Sarah marveled. "I am also a real estate agent, and I've also just closed on a house today." There were an uncomfortable couple moments of silence as my parents studied the Smiths with perplexed expressions to see if they were joking. Rather than pick up on the weird air of the conversation, Sarah and Charles diverted their attention to me and Sally. "Look at those two. Well, aren't they just two peas in a pod?" Mrs. Smith said. "Yes, they do seem to be getting along quite well," Mr. Smith chimed in. I squinted my eyes in confusion and looked at Sally. I felt a pang of unease as it dawned on me in that very moment that during this entire conversation she had silently stared and smiled at me without even taking a bite of her food. In fact, I don't think any of them had even touched their plates. But more importantly, what did they mean that we were getting along? We hadn't even spoken a word to each other yet. "Ellen, love, asked Sally about her interests," my kind father urged me. "Oh, do you read action comics?" I asked, getting an eye roll out of my mother. "Yes," Sally said, her voice high-pitched and overly enthused, a beat of quiet. "Do you like Marvel or DC or—" I prodded. "Yes," Sally said again, in the exact same tone, almost like a recording playing over. Her expression remained frozen on her face. My heart rate went up exponentially. Just what the hell was happening here? I looked over to my mom to see if she saw what I saw, but she was furiously cleaning a wine stain off her blouse with a napkin, her brow furrowed. Dad was tearing into his pasta as he listened to Mrs. Smith babbling about how nice the neighborhood is, and I wasn't sure if he was deliberately ignoring the situation or if he honestly didn't notice. I looked back at Sally. She blinked slowly. "I like comics. What comics do you like?" I just said which ones I liked. I looked down at my pasta, trying to focus on eating. "Those two are both so alike," Mrs. Smith crowed. "They both love their pasta." Mr. Smith nodded. "I think they would fare even better upstairs in the child's bedroom." "Would you show me the inside of your room?" Sally asked, her eye contact relentless. I glanced at Mom for help, but she was still concerned about that damned wine she had spilled on herself, always so desperate to look perfect. "Damn, I'm gonna go run upstairs and get another blouse." "Hun, it's fine." Dad calmed her down. "You're in your own home. Ellen, go upstairs and play with Sally." "I'm 12, we don't play," I muttered as I hesitantly got up from my chair and led Sally upstairs. I was wondering why Dad was just letting them boss me into showing their daughter my room. Now looking back on it, he must have figured Mr. and Mrs. Smith wanted to talk with just the adults about something. I tried not to look directly at Sally as I pointed out things in my room and talked to her. "These are my figurines and limited edition comics, that type of stuff." She remained silent, listening. I imagined she still had that creepy face as she watched me. When I finished the tour and finally had the guts to turn around, I was surprised to see she actually wasn't looking at me. She was sitting on the edge of my bed, her hands folded in her lap, her unwavering stare focused on a random spot on the wall. She was no longer smiling. She felt like a whole different person without her smile. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Processing," she mumbled. "What?" "Processing," she mumbled again in the same tone. "Processing. Processing." I wanted to demand what her deal was, and ask her why she and her family are such weirdos, but I bit my tongue. I knew what it was like to be an outcast, to be considered a freak. Even though she was creeping me out, I didn't want to make her feel the same. I didn't want to be like my bullies. So I simply sat next to her on the foot of my bed, sighing as I waited for her to stop and explain the joke or change the subject or anything. "Data collected," she mumbled. "Architectural reconstruction in progress. Design application in progress." I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped my fingers in front of her face. "Hello? You in there?" She went silent, then she looked at me and smiled again. "Yes," she said it in the same voice that she used at the dinner table. My stomach lurched. I wanted her out of my room. Immediately. Something was very wrong about this family. "Let's go back downstairs." I stood up and moved away, putting space between us. "I'm still hungry, aren't you?" "Yes." She got up and followed me. When we came downstairs, Mr. and Mrs. Smith was at the front door putting their coats back on, and Mom and Dad were there showing them out. I don't even know why they came with coats, because it was the middle of summer and quite humid outside. I remember wondering why they were leaving so abruptly, but ultimately being so grateful for it. "There you are, dearest daughter," Mrs. Smith said. "We were just leaving. Let us go home now." "It was wonderful having you. We should do this again sometime," my mom said flatly with all the emotion of a robot. "Have a good night," Dad said, as Sally was the last to leave out the door. He shut it behind her and turned to face us. "Well, that was strange." "Oh, we are never doing this again," Mom snorted, turning and heading back to the kitchen. "Did you see that they didn't even try the food? So rude, and they just kept looking at the wine like it was poisoned or something and didn't even take a sip." "That's not even the worst part." I couldn't contain my frustration. "Didn't you see the way the girl was acting? She was being such a creep." "Babes, you're being a bit judgmental. She may have been the most normal of the bunch," Mom said, to my complete disbelief. "I don't recall her speaking much." Dad basically agreed. "Let me help you with the dishes, hun." I watched them go, at a loss for words. In hindsight, I should have defended myself and told them how she behaved in my room. But when it came to my parents, I was extremely meek. Even if I knew I was in the right, I didn't argue too much. Plus, Mom calling me judgmental hurt my feelings, as like I said before, I hated the thought of being like my bullies. I returned to my room to sulk. In the following days, things got worse. I did not try to pursue a friendship with Sally anymore, and Mom and Dad never invited them back to the house. Dad would say hi to Mr. Smith in the mornings, on his way to his car in the driveway, and he would always be on the porch with a magazine in his hands at the exact same time. When Mom left for work, he would be gone, and instead Mrs. Smith was out there, watering the rose bushes. The shrubbery in their yard had been dead when they moved in, so we figured they must have planted those. Each time the neighbors would smile big, wave, and say, "Good morning, neighbor." My parents never lingered long and went out of their way to avoid conversation, simply giving a nod of acknowledgement or a simple greeting before going about their day. They would try to make conversation, but they'd come up with some excuse like, "Late for work, gotta go." The few times I went outside, Mr. and Mrs. Smith wasn't out there, but Sally was. She was sitting in a pink lawn chair in the center of their yard, reading a comic book. As soon as I opened the front door, her face turned in my direction, and her teeth glinted in the sun as she beamed. I paused on the porch. I wanted to turn back, but I figured that would be rude. She waved at me and gestured for me to come over. I approached the trimmed hedgerow that separated our yards. "Hi, neighbor." Sally's voice sounded more authentic now. She still sounded cheesy, but more human at least. "Hi," I said. "What you reading?" "Oh, this?" She lifted the paperback comic in her hands for like 1 second before dropping her hand back down below the hedge. I caught a glimpse of a blonde woman in some sort of armored leotard that resembled Superwoman's. "Just an action comic?" "Okay, what's it called? Can I see?" I offered my hand. Sally rolled it up in her fist like a newspaper and changed the subject. "What sort of bugs do you like, Ellen? Ladybugs, butterflies?" "I think spiders and praying mantises are cool, I guess." I shrugged. "How'd you know I like bugs?" She shrugged. "I don't know." "Let me see your comic." I chuckled and quickly reached over to snatch the comic from her hands. I framed it as a playful action so I wouldn't come across as mean. I was just wondering why she wanted to hide it from me so badly. Was she afraid I wouldn't like it? Was she desperate to get on my good side? It was good to be on the other end. I was so used to being the one absolutely aching to fit in. I looked at the cover. It looked very basic, and the anatomy of the woman was wonky. She didn't have a very original design. She looked more like a recolored Superwoman, and the title proclaimed Mega Woman. There were no authors or artists credited whatsoever, and no description on the back. I flipped through the pages, wondering what dollar store she got this thing from, and I became quite bewildered the more I skimmed the comic's contents. This happened before AI became such a big thing like it is now. If it was around back then the same way it is now, I would have accused her of buying some cheap AI-generated comic. At first glance from a mile away it looked fine, but if you actually took 1 second to read the dialogue and observe the artwork on the pages, none of it made any actual sense or told a linear storyline. The design of the heroine never stayed consistent, and neither did her powers, which ranged from fireballs to electricity bolts to mind-reading powers. At one point, there were characters with absolutely no faces and ones that barely even looked human, and more like a Cronenberg amalgamation of limbs and body parts. "Where did you even get this?" I handed it back to her. Sally smiled and stared at me, nodding, as if she didn't speak the same language and couldn't understand what I was saying, so she was deciding to pretend like she comprehended. Her eyes started to glaze over. "That's not even a real comic book," I said, taking a step back. She blinked and some focus returned to her gaze. "Are you going to school now?" "No, I'm homeschooled." "Cool, me too. Can I come over today and we can read some of your comics?" "No thanks," I shook my head. "I have to meet my tutor soon." I suddenly remembered the reason I even came out there was to check the mailbox for my new comic. It hadn't come yet, so I went back inside, feeling her stare burning holes into me the entire way. Days passed since that particular incident, and I tried my best to avoid going outside. I would ask Mom or Dad to check the mail for me for my new comic, and they kept saying it hadn't arrived yet, just bills or mail for them. The website said my comic should have been delivered a week ago at that point, so I started to suspect they were lying to me because they were too lazy to check it for me or something. I went out to get it myself and found that, of course, my parents were telling the truth. I turned to go back inside when... "Hi, neighbor." Sally was sitting in the yard with her comic again, smiling. I noticed there were some changes in her appearance. Instead of wearing it in her usual high ponytail with bangs, it was let down and spilled over her shoulders, and she'd even cut off her bangs completely as well as lightly curled it. I couldn't help but think her hair looked more like mine, but that would have been ridiculous, right? I waved at her and continued walking up the path to my porch. I was hoping the interaction would end there, but no such luck. "Come over here," she said, now on the other side of the hedgerow. I sighed hard through my nose and approached. "Yeah, I have to meet with my tutor soon, so..." Now that I was closer to her, I noticed she had on a shirt with a spider in the middle, and rather than wearing all pink like she did previously, she wore a less saturated blue. The comic held in her hand looked a bit different than before. "Want to see something cool?" She sounded a lot more casual than normal, tonally I mean. She took something out of her pocket and held out her balled-up hand to me. When she unfurled her fingers, she revealed a small praying mantis, delicate and green. "Oh, wow," I nodded. "Where'd you find him?" "Somewhere." Her smile disappeared for a second as she shrugged. "Do you want him?" "No." "Okay." She put the mantis back in her pocket, then handed me the comic. "Look at this new comic I got. I think you'll like this one." I bristled immediately. That was the exact comic I was waiting on in the mail. I glared at her accusingly. "Did you take that from our mailbox?" "No," she said, in the same way I had said that before. "Liar, you better not speak or even look at me anymore, you little thief. I'm telling your parents." I admit I may have overreacted, but all the same, I stormed over to their property right next door and rang their doorbell. No one answered. Her parents must have been at work. Or were they? "Does your mom work?" I asked, as I realized she had snuck up on me and was now standing right behind me. I rang the doorbell again and again. "I know she isn't actually a real estate agent. Are your whole family copycats?" "I don't know what you mean." Sally's expression was stoic, emotionless. I felt anger flare up in me again at her eyes, unfocusing like a dementia patient, and snatched the comic from her hands. Maybe she had done this out of spite? Maybe she never liked me to begin with? This wouldn't have been the first time someone pretended to be my friend to get close to me for nefarious purposes. I started flipping through it to ensure there was no damage. I hope you didn't ruin it. I paused. While the comic was identical to the one I was waiting on, there were very clearly some glaring flaws when you got past the cover. Characters didn't look right, and once again, the dialogue was like it was written by a 6-year-old. Some pages looked very similar to the comic I was getting in the mail. I'd seen a sample chapter, and others looked very different. It's like whoever made this was trying to copy it but somehow couldn't do it perfectly. Like those low-budget movies from unknown companies that try to copy big Pixar or Disney hits. And the plots and cast are similar, but not enough to where they'd be sued by the bigger franchises. This was not my comic at all. I handed it back to her slowly. I'm sorry, that's actually not mine. You can come in if you want. She smiled and opened the door for me. When she did, I saw something that immediately struck me as odd. A cold chill traveled down my back and I had to swallow a lump in my throat before I answered. No, thank you. I gotta go back. Sorry again. I lightly jogged back to my house, hoping it would come across as me trying not to be late to my tutoring session, rather than me being eager to get as far away from her as possible. I now knew for certain that something was very, very wrong about this family. I mean, for one, what teenage girl reacts so calmly to the way I acted and even went as far as to invite me inside? But more importantly, why was their hall decorated the exact same as ours? Our home has a hall leading from the front door connecting to the first floor rooms. We have 2 small tables on either side of our front door, completed with potted dangling plants. Our wall was originally this bland eggshell white color, but Mom had put this gray wallpaper with a darker gray floral vine pattern up. There were also framed photos of each of us on the left wall, which you would pass when walking inside. 3 in all. One of my dad, then my mom, then me. What I saw of their hall looked identical, with the same exact wallpaper, picture frames depicting vague, blurry figures, and even down to the home sculpture, on one of the tables next to the door. The exact same furniture, the exact same designs and colors. It was eerie how they'd only been in our house once and still could remember that much detail. A scary thought I had was, how much more of their house looked exactly like ours? On the coffee table in the living room, I saw the actual comic I had been waiting for. My parents didn't tell me they had found it in the mail this morning, and I had assumed since they said nothing that they hadn't checked. Typical. At least I knew what I knew then. I didn't know what to do with this information. All I could think to do was tell Mom when she got off of work first. Her face seemed perplexed, but she didn't seem to take it as seriously as I did. I don't think she actually believed me, but at the same time, she didn't want to tell me that. Wow, that's strange. What a bunch of creeps. With that, Mom went into the kitchen to make herself a smoothie. That's all you have to say? I demanded. No, I agree, that's really weird that they'd try to copy our interior design. She dumped yogurt and frozen fruit into the blender. But I mean, they do say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. I'll bet they got their stuff a lot cheaper too. No, Mom. I pinched the bridge of my nose. They didn't try to copy our house. They actually did. Down to the last tiniest detail. It's not flattery, it's insanity. I don't remember what she said after, but her reaction didn't change much. She beat me to the punch of telling Dad after he got off work, and then he pretty much had the same uninterested response as her. It felt like he didn't care much for the topic of conversation and was just contributing because he could see that I cared. Later that night in my room, I saw the small praying mantis Sally had shown me. He was standing on my vanity, completely still, a little under an inch tall. I can't tell you how I knew it was the same one, I just felt it in my bones. I trapped it in a container and let it outside in the backyard. Soon as I did, he darted towards the brown picket fence and slipped through a crack into the Smith's backyard. Under the wooden boards of the fence, I saw the shadows of someone's feet on the other side. Someone was crouching low behind the fence. "Why are you hiding, fucking weirdo?" I hissed quietly so that my parents wouldn't overhear. I just knew it was her. I didn't get a response, so I came closer, close enough to peek over the fence. Of course it was Sally. and she held the praying mantis in her open palms with that content smile I always saw her with, frozen on her face. "What are you?" My breath caught in my throat as Sally's lower jaw unhinged, for lack of a better word, and she allowed the praying mantis to crawl inside. She shut her mouth and crawled on all fours up the back wall of her house, through the open second-story window which must have been her room. I reacted quickly. I started whimpering in fear and dashed back into the house, running into the living room where my parents were cuddled up on the couch watching a movie. They quickly sat up, seeing my petrified expression. The fear in me was so palpable that tears were building up in my eyes. "Oh my God, baby, what's wrong?" Mom asked. I started stammering and stuttering, pointing to the backyard. I couldn't form a coherent sentence. Mom held me and comforted me, shushing me and patting my head. Dad went out to the backyard. We heard him yelling at something, shooing something or someone away. When he came back, I looked hopeful. Had Sally come back? Had he seen her in that horrifying state, and would he now believe me? "Oh, honey," he chuckled. "It was only a raccoon getting into our scraps from the last time I grilled. He won't hurt you." "Unless he has rabies," my mom snapped, rubbing my back. "Don't worry, baby, I hate vermin too." I pulled away from her and shot them both a lost and helpless look. He didn't see Sally scaling walls like a spider, and if I told them what I saw now, I would look like a loon. "What?" Dad frowned. I shook my head and went upstairs. I dressed into my pajamas and brushed my teeth, set on having an early night so I could get over what transpired outside. I turned on my table lamp in the corner with the ambient blue light and crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I tossed and turned, trying my best to go to sleep. All the hairs on the back of my neck were raising, and my brain felt fuzzy. I felt eyes on me, but I knew there was nothing in my room. I turned over on my side for the 100th time, this time facing the window. My heart immediately plummeted into my stomach as two wet circles glinted in the lamplight behind the glass pane of my window. A pair of eyes, unseeing and opened wider than possible. I couldn't see anything of the face below the nose, but I could still recognize Sally as she had her face pressed up against my window. My second-floor window. I screamed and threw the covers off me, running to my parents. Of course, when I brought them in and they turned the big light on, nothing was there. I remember begging them to call the police, but they refused, telling me that they would not believe their next-door neighbor's young daughter was peering through my window like a peeping Tom. They would especially not believe that she had grabbed a ladder to do that and ran with it in 2 minutes. They tried to reassure me that I was seeing things, that my mind was playing tricks after what I saw in their house. Dad said I watched too many horror movies, although I barely had seen any. The most they did was tell me I could stay up for as long as I wanted, and that I didn't have to do school tomorrow so I wouldn't have to worry about being tired. Mom even set up the living room so I could camp out down there. She brought my covers and pillows down and made me hot chocolate and gave me snacks from the pantry. This barely did anything to make me feel better. Throughout the night, I watched movies meant for kids to keep my mind off the Smiths, and periodically checked to make sure all the doors and windows remained locked. I covered up all the windows with the curtains as well. I was definitely paranoid at that point. I did not even sleep until daybreak, and not even the sounds of my parents going to work roused me. At some point in the early afternoon, I slowly woke up to the sound of the front door being unlocked and opened. Had one of my parents come home early? I sat up and looked towards the hall, but I couldn't see the front door from where I was. "Mom?" The footsteps entering the hall stopped. Quickly they retreated, and the door slammed shut. I ran to the window. Mrs. Smith was running back to their house full speed, faster than I'd seen any woman run in heels. She was like a track star. My cell phone on the coffee table buzzed. It was my dad. He told me to leave the house quickly and go to the neighbors, and that the police were on their way. I didn't even get my shoes on before I did as I was told. I banged on old Mrs. Johnson's door until she let me in. Later, I would find out that while my dad was at work, he decided to review the security camera footage of our house on his computer. Mom and I had no idea he even placed hidden cameras around the inside of the house. We knew there was a camera installed on the porch, which showed Mrs. Smith breaking in with a copy of our house key, and we still have no idea how she obtained it. But the security cameras inside our home showed all members of the Smith family infiltrating our house while my parents were at work and while I was in my room being homeschooled. Since my ears were covered with headphones during my tutor's virtual meetings, I never heard anything out of the ordinary. They'd be in and out very quick. They would place various things around the house, too small to be seen on camera, but it reminded me of the praying mantis Sally had. I remember the weird movements the insect had. Was it even real? Or was it a tiny robot designed with a camera to surveil our home, so they could copy it to a T? When police arrived, the Smiths were gone without a trace. Their van remained in the yard, and it had no tags or even a valid license. There was a license plate, but no record of it being registered, and the characters on it weren't even numbers or letters of the alphabet, just scribbles. When they asked the leasing office for access inside the home, the staff were shocked that anyone had been in there. They said that the home was still for sale, and no one had bought it. They didn't realize anyone had moved in, with the van being in the garage all the time and no moving trucks going in and out. In fact, we never even saw them leave the property, come to think of it. The whole operation would have been found out much sooner if a Karen had poked into the situation and asked for verification they even lived there. But, like I said, this is an upscale community and this would usually never happen. When police got access, my fears were confirmed. Every single room was an exact match of ours, down to the used toothbrushes and minor wear and tear. However, some books and pictures seemed so obviously faked, worse than a bad Photoshop job. Illegible English and vague human figures with no faces and very weird things about their anatomy, like a disjointed shoulder or extra finger. They got descriptions of the Smiths from us, as hardly any neighbors caught glimpses of them. They said they'd keep us informed, but we haven't heard anything since, and it's been many years. Mom called them once to get information, and all they could say was that it was hard proving any of the Smiths existed. They did believe us, as we had surveillance footage, obviously, but they could find no record of these people. It's like they popped into existence that one day they moved in and then vanished into nothingness the day Dad called the police. The scariest part was that the officer she talked to mentioned in a very disturbed tone of voice that no fingerprints were left anywhere in the home, despite the Smiths living there for close to a month. We moved maybe a few months later. I have absolutely no idea what that was, and when I brought it up to my parents recently, they made it clear they preferred not to speak on it again. The one thing Dad said was that he was glad something in him told him to check the camera footage, or even install those cameras in the first place. There was no telling what their intentions were.